All right, everybody. We've got another very special guest for you all. I want everyone to welcome to the show Mike Dean. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you for having me, guys.
Yeah, appreciate you being here, especially your first time. I Grave Brigade. We're gonna talk about that. I just read through it, really liked it, and it's honestly it's one of Chris's like this is his book, so he's got to finish reading it after this. But I really enjoyed it pacing and everything. So we'll chat about that. But it is your first time, Mike. So we're doing the annoying thing of putting you through the gauntlet of telling us your origin story of what got you into comics, creating your own comic. Where did that all start?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first off, thank you for reading the comic and
Yeah,
just like taking the time to check it out.
yeah, for sure.
Um, so I have an older brother. Tim also has an older brother, big age gaps. So they both were introducing us to content beyond our age since we were like 5 or 6.
Mm-hmm.
And comics was one of it for me. My brother, he definitely was the first person I knew that had comic books, and I remember going to the comic book store with him and my dad one time as a kid, and I was like, I want my first comic, and I'm
Yeah,
trying to get it. And my dad is like, doesn't want to get me something like Wolverine that I'm asking for, probably knowing how bloody it's going to be,
yeah,
or just thinking like, no, this is like lowbrow.
yeah.
So he found me a graphic novel of The Hobbit, and
Oh,
that was
nice.
my like
Wow.
first comic gifted to me or bought for me. And then from there, I just like would read through my brother's comics, and I'd get a sense of like the pictures. And then in college, I went to film school, so Tim, and we met there, and we started writing together probably like sophomore junior year, and like working on each other's short films. We were in like same classes, so a lot of times we were paired up anyway. And then after college, we were doing like sketch comedy and web series type of stuff. And I was going to comic conventions because I was working for Stan Lee's YouTube channel as a cameraman.
Oh, what the
And
hell?
yeah, and it was
That's
great. And I'd meet
that's
all these
awesome.
creators, and
Yeah,
they do their interviews. And like, the biggest thing that all of them said was like, you don't wait for someone to ask you to do it. You just go and make a comic. And I was like, I came back to Tim with that, and I was like, I think we should try to make a comic. We both love them, and we started thinking about like the budget and how like if we want to do anything with action or like something that would require like CGI or anything like that, we're really limited in what we as independent filmmakers can do. But in a comic book, like your
yeah,
limit is only the page rate. So you
right.
can have explosions, you can have space battles, you can do all this like cool stuff.
Yeah,
So it kind of became like then we were just waiting for the right project, and we started with Superbud, which was like a action comedy kind of parodying superhero stories, and then shortly after we started that, we started working on Grave Brigade because we wanted to have something that was like different. We didn't want to go like comedy again. We wanted to find something to be like stark difference.
mm-hmm. And let's chat about Superbud. Was that your first Kickstarter, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
we did the first issue on our own, and then the second issue we kickstarted. So we already had the benefit of like having one issue out, which
Mm-hmm.
not a lot of people had access to, but it helped that like as soon as people pledged to issue two, we
You
would
got the
send
first
them
one.
issue one,
That's cool.
like
Yeah,
digital. So like you got an initial like, oh, okay, these guys are not just like going to take my money and run when they're making like a
yeah.
pothead comic of all
Right.
things.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Real quick to rewind, you mentioned Tim. Who's Tim?
Tim is the co-writer, co-creator of Grave Brigade and Superbud.
Okay.
Tim Radecki.
Yep. That would give him a name drop. You can make it today, but yeah,
Just for listeners out there who
yeah,
don't know who Tim, who
Good
has been
context.
emailing
yeah,
back and forth with Tim for weeks.
yeah, Um, and so how does that process work with both of you guys writing together? Do you like bounce ideas off each other? Do you kind of do your own scenes and put them together? Or
Yeah, we so we usually go in drafts. we bounce ideas off of each other for a while, and usually then we like do an outline either together or separately just to kind of like figure out what needs to be in it. And then we just take turns doing drafts. So one of us will do the initial draft, then the next person, it's on them to get it back with like whatever changes they want to make. We always like save the old versions so that we can come back to something if the new one doesn't work. But that kind of like helps us to just refine it, because usually we're editing something that already like is there. And so we're just kind of like shifting and making some changes. And then whatever stays was clearly good enough to make it into the next draft, and whatever wasn't, you know.
You think it's more beneficial to write with somebody as like having a partner to write with? Do you think that kind of elevates it?
For me, yeah.
Yeah.
I find, I mean, I like to write solo still. And I do like do that as well. And so does Tim, but those are more fun in like short form, like short stories, Ashcan comics, short films. And like I work in film as like my day job. So like a lot of times I'll get to work on like a music video or a commercial, and that becomes like short form storytelling.
Okay.
So I'm comfortable there. But when it comes to something where it's like a, you know, a large story arc, it's so beneficial to have somebody who kind of like grounds you and brings you back to like what you need to know, and just sort of like refine it together. Cause like sometimes if I'm doing a story by myself, part of the process is not knowing what it's about yet, you know, and I'm kind of discovering it as I write. But when you work with a collaborator, you talk about a lot of those ideas up front, and you sort of like then have like more of like a blueprint when you do go and write on your own, because you're like, oh, I already talked about this. I already know that like the characters need to feel like this, or the setting needs to like work in this way. And it makes for less editing on the back end.
That's awesome. Yeah, that makes sense to me as far as the creative process.
Do you ever feel in that process that like does it feel like a 50-50 split all the time, or do you ever feel like maybe one book is more you and less Tim, and vice versa for another book?
I think that's how it always starts, is the idea always starts as like predominantly one person over another. Like Superbud, I came to Tim with that idea. So I had a lot of strong opinions right out of the gate about like what it needed to be and how it needed to function. And, you know, then Tim, like, I have to essentially sell him on the idea. And it's not like, you know, I can't work on it if he doesn't want to, but if we're going to work on something together, we usually have to have like an initial pitch. And then as it goes on, the more we refine it, the more work goes into the picking an artist for it, picking a letterer, picking a colorist. Then it becomes more 50-50 as the story goes on, or as the project goes on, or like working on the Kickstarter and having to divvy up the duties of like how to get the campaign ready or reach out to podcasts or things like that. Then you see more of like ownership, you know, become more of like 50-50. And like Grave Brigade was Tim's idea. So he came to me with it. And like, I'm sure initially he had like a stronger grasp and like a clearer vision of what it was supposed to be. But then like at this point, I feel like we're usually like finishing each other's thoughts. Like if one of us starts talking about a note or an idea, like we've been working on issue 5 script recently, and we both knew something wasn't working. And then like I just did a round of notes and we discussed it on the phone, and like one or two things, it was like before I'm even done saying the note, Tim knows where I'm going. And it's like, oh, I see where yeah, that totally works. Let's do that.
Right. That's cool.
Sorry, I was laughing myself because I thought about this. Has there ever been a moment where like you two are, like you said, Grave Brigade was Tim's initial idea. Was there a moment during that 50-50 split where you're like, you're picking an artist, and it doesn't have to be just this book, but just at any point where Tim's like, this artist is perfect, and you're just sitting there going, I don't know, I think we should go with somebody else, and it caused like a rift at all?
No, I mean, that's a great question. And I feel like I run into that more with film stuff, but
Oh, okay.
with Grave Brigade or Superbud or any other projects we've talked about, part of the process is like talking about the style or the like mood it's got to have. And then usually it's not like either of us falls in love with one artist. We usually look up like Tim's really good at researching this stuff. He creates like whole spreadsheets of like artists that are like what their price range is, what their, background is. And then we'll go through that and we both come up with like a top five. And hopefully we both have more than one artist in our same top five. And then that kind of makes it easier for us to like sort of be aligned.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Yeah, because I would think that, I mean, I've never written anything, but like you have a vision of when you're writing. I mean, both of you have separately, like when you're animating or illustrating something in your own mind while writing it, right? So you must have like how a character should be designed or a monster should look. But I guess with Grave Brigade, it's pretty straightforward because you're working mostly with like monster movie classic monster villains, right? For the most part, and stuff like that.
Yeah, a lot of how we were trying to come up with the look for Grave Brigade was the soldiers. And we both kind of were like, yeah, we want this to have. Sorry, excuse me.
You're good.
We both wanted to have like hard jaw lines,
Yeah, right.
box ear shapes. Like we were
Yep.
kind of thinking about things like the '90s animated Batman series, and
Mm-hmm.
like
Yep.
that kind of became a little bit of like a compass for us. And then we initially didn't want to do colors; we were going to keep it black and white.
Okay.
And then when we kind of talked about it more. We're like, well, even though we want to have this throwback black and white look, colors just enrich the page so much. So we took an attempt at it, and then we were like, let's just mute the colors. We'll wash it out a little bit. It won't be like Superbud where it's like these bright, greens and oranges and stuff like that. And we found like a nice happy medium. And we use actually the same colorist who did Superbud for
Oh, cool.
us. So he also was like stepping out of his comfort zone a little bit on this, but he was really good at taking notes and feedback, and he was willing to like really refine it with us to find like the right, color palette.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. And I do like it's like the black, white, and red almost, but I used to have yellow and stuff in there. But like you said, washed out. I think it came out nicely.
Yeah, it has the feel and look of a war movie, which
Yeah,
I'm assuming is what you were going for.
Yep,
Absolutely.
So I guess we haven't really talked about the plot. So just give us the quick plot synopsis. What is the Grave Brigade?
So the Grave Brigade is essentially the Allied forces' response to the Nazis using black science and the occult to create these monsters to help win the war. And so they picked Graves to lead it because, as you see in the first 2 pages, he's the only survivor of his platoon, and he runs into the Grim Reaper on the battlefield. And as you'll see later in the story, he held that story, and he like didn't like make up anything, and so they're kind of thinking he's like crazy, and then they're putting together this team, and they're like, this is the guy.
Yeah.
So then he gets paired with all of these like kind of washouts, killers, people who are like also mentally unfit for battle or like are criminals, and he kind of takes them as this like Suicide Squad type of group.
Yep.
And first issue is all about them encountering a werewolf in the Black Forest.
And I'm going to say this because I'm a huge fan of like occult and monster comics and stuff like this. And I don't know if you had read it, but the Sergeant Rock versus the Army of the Dead book that came out this year. I want everyone to know this is a better version of that book, personally.
That's
because
amazing. Thank you.
High praise.
That's high praise because okay, Bruce Campbell, he's probably pissed about this, but Um, the one thing that was missing from the Sergeant Rock book, and because that was like 6 issues, and what you're doing here is I got 6 issues of soldiers fighting Nazis, fighting Nazi zombies, monsters, where you actually identified who each army person is in the squad. Like the first issue, you're okay. You have the wind talker, you have the explosives expert, and things like that. And you put not only a personality but a specific job. Where it's like, I think in that book, it was almost every issue was just like, okay, we got this group, and we're gonna throw this group at these people. Next issue, throw these group at this people. Okay, they won.
Mm-hmm.
Where it's like it would make sense. You're dealing with the undead. Okay, you have a wind talker that speaks to the spirits, and that it was awesome. Where he's just like werewolf, and I thought that scene was really cool. The wind talker is probably my favorite character, even though you don't see that much of him. But that's what I really liked about the issue, because and while I talked to you a little bit about how it read quickly. That's not a bad thing, because there's still content there, right? And you can talk about, I think it's probably a good idea to talk about like that separate team that you built, if you want to elaborate a little bit there. But
absolutely. Thank you. That is really high praise. Yeah, I mean, that was something that came out a lot more with each draft. And Tim was very like adamant from the get-go that he wanted each of the members to have like a specialization, but like what they specialized in or what their character quirks are, those all got refined as we went. Because one thing that Tim and I tend to always remind ourselves is if something's not working, like we don't have to force it. The answer will come as we keep going through the process. And then all of a sudden something clicks into place and it's like, oh, it was always going to be that. We just didn't know it yet because it was covered by all this other shit.
Yeah, right. That makes sense. Yeah, and I think, I read through the first issue. Obviously, I mean, it leaves on a cliffhanger where you could do a second issue. I don't know if you want to tease. I mean, the first issue is about a werewolf. I don't know if you want to talk about where the second issue is going to go after that, because that got me pretty excited.
Vampires.
Yeah.
Not yet.
So the big thing for us was we wanted to not drag out one monster or one story for like 6 issues or a trade back, because something we learned with Superbud was like, if we tell the story that slow, we're going to lose people over the time it takes to get all these out.
Yep.
So we wanted each story to function like a Saturday morning cartoon, like something just like quick and digestible that you can like walk away from and not be like, well, I don't know what's going to happen next. Or I can't know if it's a good story if I don't know what happened next. But the second issue picks up with them in a new country, and
Transylvania.
I'll say this. Vampires are on the radar, but I don't want to get your hopes up. It won't be in the first few issues, but definitely on the radar. That's something that we definitely want to give some special time to in the future. But
I'll give you on the radar. I'll give it to you.
But I would say if you were thinking about like what the next one's going to be, it's more in line with less of the Universal monsters and more of like a William Friedkin Exorcist.
Awesome. I like that. That's cool.
That is cool.
Yeah, that's a cool approach of like mixing the two interchangeable. And there's a name drop in the first issue too of Frankenstein. I don't know, that got me pretty hyped too.
Yeah, that also that's kind of the through line of the first graphic novel, or the first trade back rather, is where that story is building to. And they kind of piece more of that together over the next few issues.
Awesome. So
it's got me excited.
Yeah.
Hitler building the Frankenstein. You don't have to answer that.
Yeah. It makes sense, right? Come on. I'm super excited for it. The first issue is great, and I like. We could talk about the rewards you have on Kickstarter, because as of this episode, everybody, there's 1 day left on Kickstarter. So just pause this and go check it out. the variant, I always love that. I see more and more of this, and I love that the classic horror variant is my
Yeah.
style. But yeah, you can talk about the options you have for covers and stuff.
Yeah. So Tim found a couple of really good variant artists for this, and one of them is Slick Satan, and he does the throwback horror one that looks like Tales from the Crypt,
Yep.
or
Mm-hmm.
something like that. And then he found this other one, this other illustrator, Bugra, who he does these like amazing like pinup style black and whites of
Mm-hmm.
monsters and other characters, and we got him to do the black and white monster movie edition variant,
Mm-hmm.
which we're also going to put out as a hardcover, and
Nice.
it's going to be all black and white grayscale interior, so it'll feel like you are watching something from like the 1950s or 1960s.
That's so cool.
I'm assuming that idea came from the originally wanting the book to be black and white.
Yes.
You
Yeah,
guys
that
kind of met in
was.
between on that one.
Yeah, we also when we did Superbud, one of our rewards on the last Kickstarter was we did a special edition called That Emerald Flower,
Mm.
and it was an homage to That Yellow Bastard. So everything in the comic is
Mm-hmm.
grayscale with the exception of the Superbud green.
Okay. Nice.
And we loved that, and we got like a great response to that. Like that was the thing most people wanted to get, like our highest reward tier. And so we were like, we gotta do something like that for this too. Let's do like this monster movie edition. It'll be all black and white. We're still kind of playing with the tone on it. We want to make sure it really has like we might add in a few extra aspects to pull that off of the silver screen look.
Mm-hmm.
But we're really excited to do that one.
That's
The
awesome.
hardcover. We wanted something also like we had so many people who have pledged to the past couple Superbuds, and the biggest thing they always say is like, I just wish I could put it on a shelf, but it's
Right.
like a soft issue.
Yeah.
So we were like, this would be fun to have something that's like you can actually put on your bookshelf and it'll stand up, and it has this sick cover with like the throwback.
Yeah, you gotta be careful creating a market for single issue hardcovers. This is a scary thing because
I know.
this is the reason I don't buy single issues. But and I will say the price point's pretty good. I mean, you have what, $50 for that issue,
Mm-hmm.
plus you get the regular issue with it for
Yeah.
physical, and
Yeah.
I've seen floppy covers with shiny metallics go for more than $50, folks. So hardcover black and white edition's pretty sick for that price.
Yeah, I'm also one of the fun add-ons that we did is the dog tags.
Yeah, that's
So
cool.
the Grave Brigade dog tag from the comic, we were able to get that like laser etched onto dog tags, custom ones, and I already did a mock-up and it looked sick. I think it's great.
Awesome.
Yeah, and going through your campaign, like I like something I've noticed a lot with Kickstarter recently, where things feel simpler than they used to, and I think a part of that's the add-on tiers that Kickstarter added in, but also the fact that you had one big thing, the black and white that you're going for, and you didn't do a whole lot of extra on top of that. So, was there a lot of thought into how the tiers were going to build and how simplified you made them?
We talked about a lot. Originally, there were more tiers, more rewards, more ideas, and then there also was a point where we kind of were like, but we're also like plateauing on price where like there's not like a escalation of tiers. It's like it hits a certain number and that's just around there.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's part of how we decided to do the book. The hardcover was one so that it wasn't just another variant, because if you do too many variants, then it's like, I don't want to put pressure on like a completist to get three different variants that all are like very similar in everything except for cover. So by doing it as a hardcover and the black and white version, we also felt like we got to build up. And we were originally going to also do patches, like army patches that you could iron on. But we decided to stick with just the dog tags on this one. And if we really took off, we would like maybe do it as a stretch goal. But for the meantime, it's something that we can add in when we do the next Kickstarter.
Definitely.
Very cool. Yeah, I think it's like Chris said, it's simple but effective. The way it's set up, and you have everything available for the add-ons. Yeah, I think it's awesome. Looks like a great book. I can't wait to see it.
Thanks.
Print. Yeah. And if you want to send our listeners and our viewers anywhere to follow you and the stuff you're doing, where can we send them?
Absolutely. My Instagram is all things _ Mike Dean. And then Tim's Instagram is Tim Rad Writes. And you can also check out any of my like film and comic work on allthingsmikedean.com. And we have Superbud at superbudcomic.com and on Instagram at superbudcomic.
And as always, everybody, I will have all those links in the show notes down below to the Kickstarter, to Mike's website, and so on. So make sure you check out all of that. And check out the Kickstarter because it looks awesome. Mike obviously really loves the book, and I look forward to reading it as soon as we finish up here. Mike, thank you so much for taking the time to come chat with us today. Appreciate it, and we look forward to the next time.
Thanks for having me, guys. This was awesome.
Yep, thanks.